You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250. This is where we remember events that took place 250 years ago this week. It's a short bonus episode from the American Revolution podcast to remember these important 250th anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the Battle of Brooklyn, which took place during the last week of August, 1776. The British attack on New York was no surprise. They had been gathering the largest military force ever seen in North America for months. They had taken over Staten Island as a base of operation, and the Continentals had established defenses in Manhattan and Long Island. British Commander General William Howe had landed his troops on Long Island, taking days to secure a beachhead in late August. The Americans didn't even contest the landing. Instead, the Americans planned to make their stand along the Gowanus Heights, which was inland and out of range of the Navy's cannons. Even after the landing, General George Washington refused to commit his troops to Long Island, fearing that it could be a British feint that would force him to commit his troops there while the British landed directly on Manhattan. So Washington kept the bulk of his army in Manhattan. General Howe seemed to favor a direct assault on the Continental lines in Long Island, overwhelming the enemy and just pushed them back against the East River. Second in command, though, General Henry Clinton had other ideas. He had grown up on Long Island when his father was governor of the colony and probably knew the land better than any other general on either side. In evaluating the land and speaking with locals, Clinton discovered that the Continentals had placed defenses at the three main passes through the Gowanus Heights, but for some reason they had left a fourth pass, known as the Jamaica Pass, unprotected, perhaps because they thought it was too far to the east and no one would bother to go that far around. Clinton, of course, decided that was the perfect place to move his army and then roll up the Gowanus Heights defenders from behind in a flanking maneuver. On the evening of August 26th, Clinton led 10,000 soldiers, about half the British force on Long Island, on the 6-mile march to the Jamaica Pass. To keep the march a secret, they took prisoner anyone they met along the way. When they arrived at the Jamaica Pass, 5 Continental officers on horseback approached them, thinking that they were Continental forces. The British just captured them without firing a shot, and under interrogation they learned that these 5 men were the only soldiers who were deployed to cover the pass. By dawn, Clinton had led his army through the pass and had crossed the Gowanus Heights without encountering any enemy fire. On the morning of August 27th, General Howe deployed his remaining forces on a direct march against the rebel forces at Brooklyn. The army moved forward slowly, with its lines in place by dawn. The British artillery opened fire. British regulars and Hessians marched forward to test the Continental lines on the heights. Lord Stirling commanded the Continentals defending the heights, and among his soldiers were the famed Smallwood's Maryland Regiment and Hazlitt's Delaware Regiment. These were 2 of the Continental Army's best equipped and best trained regiments, and in both of their cases their regimental commanders were missing, having been called to New York for court-martial duty. But the regiments fought with distinction, along with others from Connecticut and Pennsylvania. 1,600 Continental soldiers held back the advancing British and Hessians for hours. For much of the morning, the enemy would approach within about 200 yards and then pull back in the face of enemy fire. The Continentals were impressed with their ability to stand toe-to-toe with the enemy in open field. Then, around 9 a.m., Howe fired a special signal gun, at which point General Clinton's forces, which had taken all of the Gowanus Heights defenders from behind, now descended on the main Continental forces at Brooklyn. Generals Sullivan and Stirling now faced not only 10,000 enemy soldiers in front of them, but another 10,000 attacking them from behind. They realized that the British and Hessians in their front had never been attempting to overwhelm them. They had simply been distracting them while Clinton's army came around from behind. The Americans defended themselves admirably in the face of the overwhelming assault. Some soldiers covered the retreat of others, but really had nowhere to go but into the Gowanus Swamp. Some of them drowned, but many eventually made their way back to the Continental forts at Brooklyn. The Maryland Regiment, under the command of Stirling, continued to hold off the enemy, giving other Continentals time to withdraw, but they were soon overwhelmed. The attacking Hessian soldiers killed without mercy, bayoneting soldiers who tried to surrender. The British took hundreds of prisoners, including Continental Generals Sullivan and Stirling, as well as Militia General Nathaniel Woodhull. Washington crossed the East River from Manhattan to Brooklyn that morning, working with Putnam to restore order. By 10 a.m., Washington and Putnam watched hundreds of fleeing soldiers straggling into their lines. At the same time, the British Navy attempted to move up the East River, thus cutting off more reinforcements from New York and also the only line of retreat against the advancing British Army. Then, around noon, General Howe called a halt to the advance. It's hard to guess Howe's true motives, but the best argument is that he did not want to run uncontrolled into a concentrated and embedded enemy that could end up driving back the British or inflicting terrible casualties on the British as they overran the forts. Despite ending early, the British had won the day by any measure. They held the field that they planned to take with only about 400 casualties. By comparison, the Patriots had taken about 1,100 casualties and about an equal number taken prisoner. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. For more context on this story, check out episode 103 of the American Revolution podcast at blog.amrevpodcast.com. And please subscribe for free to the whole podcast on whatever platform you like. Thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.